Hi, and welcome to Lisa's Stamp Studio. My name is Lisa Curcio. Today I'm going to teach you actually two techniques in one. We're going to be doing a reverse masking technique as well as a splatter technique, and they work beautifully together. There are various ways of creating a masking technique, which basically means you're covering up one area of your project to stamp or color in another area. While there are various different ways you can create this technique, today's technique is going to stack the colors in a really unique fashion. If this is your first time visiting my channel, I would love to have you subscribe. Make sure you click that bell icon so that you'll get notifications when I'm live right here on YouTube, as well as when I share a new video. Let's head over to the stamp table and let's get started on today's card. You'll want to start by protecting your work surface, and that's because we're going to be doing a little bit of stamping off of some of the color to control the coverage that we're going to place here on this piece of Whisper White cardstock. You're going to find all the cutting dimensions and a link to the pictures and the supplies that I've used down in the video description below. I'm going to want to create a channel on my card that I'm going to place my color. The easiest way for me to do this was to use larger Post-it notes. These measure 4 by 6. They're relatively inexpensive, and that sticky end is going to provide me with two things. Not only is it going to give me a straight edge, but it's also going to help hold my cardstock to my work surface so that it doesn't move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quadrant off an area here. Now my grid paper is really a great tool because the lines on the grid paper are going to help me make this line as straight as possible. So I'm going to use that sticky edge and I'm going to tack that down on my card. I'm taking another one of those Post-it notes and I'm looking for that exact same line, and I'm going to attach that here at the bottom of the grid paper, connecting those lines and connecting here at the center. You'll want to look to see that this is as visually straight as possible. The sticky edges here and here are going to hold that cardstock in place. Now, the amount of space you leave between here is entirely up to you. There is no right or wrong way. So I'm going to leave a small margin on this side, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, using the grid paper here at the top to help me align this nice and straight. I'll take my second Post-it note, and I'm following that grid line down, which is going to be here, and I'm going to line up my two Post-it notes in the center. And I'm just going to press those in place. The one reason I like Post-it notes versus any other type of low-tack tape is I find that it won't rip my cardstock when I lift it. I have tried various types of low-tack tape without success. Now, once that's secure, I'm going to go ahead and turn that scratch paper to make this a little bit easier for my hand. The next step is going to be for you to grab a ruler. Depending on how big this is, you're going to need to measure. So I can see mine is exactly 2 inches. You'll want to cut yourself a piece of computer printer paper. This is nice and thin. You want to make sure that it covers that entire circumference. You don't want to leave any gap. So I'm going to cut mine just a little bit over 2 inches to make sure I don't have a gap here. This is about 2 1/8 inch wide, and you're going to see that it's going to cover that channel perfectly. You're going to need to make sure that this piece of paper is as long as the channel is on your card, if not just a little bit longer, so you have something to hold on to. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to tear this paper to create a border line. The more uneven, the better, so don't worry about it if it's all crooked. We're looking for that uneven mark. Now you can navigate this depending on how much you want to fill. So I'm going to leave a little bit more space here on the right-hand side, which is going to give me a little area here at the top to hold with my hand. I'm going to be using a variation of colors to create tone, and my first one is going to be crumb cake. So I'm going to open up my ink pad. I'm going to leave that off to the side. I'm going to be using this area or this area on my grid paper to stamp off some of that excess ink. I took a Stampin' Sponge and I cut it into wedges. And I love to use a binder clip to help keep my fingers clean. It gives me a place that I can hold on to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ink up my sponge and I'm going to tap off here on my paper to make sure that I can control the ink coverage. And then I'm going to make sure that that paper that I've cut is going to line up in that channel really, really well. And I'm going to determine how much room I want here. Once I'm ready to go, we're going to brush down with that color. You're going to have to reload and get the sponge full of ink in order to get this technique started. You don't want to go back and forth because you risk curling that paper up. What you're looking to do is create a darker area at the top and a lighter area of that shade toward the bottom. How dark and how light you make them is completely up to you. There is no right or wrong way. It's just a matter of preference. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to repeat this step just to fill in this channel. Now that that's been completed, we're going to go ahead and remove that. You're going to see that we have the masked area here and the area we've colored here. We're going to rip this paper one more time. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here and I'm creating another jagged edge. This time I'm going to move the paper up just a little bit further. You're going to notice the paper is going to get shorter, which means this area is not covered, which is fine. As long as your hand is clean, you're good to go. And then you're going to gauge how much of this area you want to be shown for the next color. My next choice is going to be balmy blue. I've got a separate sponge wedge here, and I'm going to go ahead and ink this up. This is a lighter blue, so you're going to probably need to load that sponge a little bit more than normal. I'm going to tap off that ink. Very important that you don't mix these up because this is probably still wet, which means you can pick up this tone and mix it with this shade. Once you have your sponge loaded, go ahead and determine one more time the area you want to color, and then you're going to do the exact same thing by brushing that color down. By making sure you stamp off some of that excess ink, it's going to allow you to control that coverage because otherwise it's going to be too strong coming right off the ink pad. We're going to do the exact same thing here as we've done before. This time I'm going to stretch the color down almost all the way to the bottom. And if you leave an area that's white, it just adds more visual interest. You do not need to cover the whole thing unless that's what your goal is. I'm going to go ahead and remove that mask now, which is going to leave this area. Now, I'm not worried about that little tiny area here that's got some blue underneath it because I'm doing a graduation of darker shades of the same color. So we're going to rip this one more time. So I'm going to go deeper now on this side and come across. And that's now going to leave us another section. This time I'm switching over to Pacific Point, a little bit darker blue, a little bit deeper tone. And I've got a separate sponge for this. Very important that you don't mix up your sponges or your blending tools. So I'm going to hold this where I want it. Once again, making sure that it's filled this channel. I'll hold that in place. I'll load up my sponge and looking for a new spot here in my scratch paper to tap off. You're going to see how much darker that is. And again, you're going to brush down. You want to make sure you're not lifting the paper, otherwise you're going to get a lot of color up underneath there. And I'm going to do the exact same thing now that I've done on the previous step. How far down that you go is entirely up to you. Last but not least, I'm going to use Night of Navy, and again, a separate sponge. Here is our last area to fill in. We're not going to need this piece of paper any longer, so I'm going to toss that away. Now, you might be wondering how I'm going to fill this, and actually, it's the exact same way, from the top down, because you want the highest concentration of color to be at the top to mimic these areas. This color is even stronger than the ones before, so you're going to want to be very careful and tap off that excess ink on your scratch paper to make sure that you can control that coverage. Once again, we're going to start at the top and we're going to work our way down. I like to concentrate the most ink here at the top and then just gently pull that color down, and you're going to see the beautiful streaks inside the ink that come from the sponge. Now that that's finished, I'm going to go ahead and add that splatter technique that we talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that so that it's straight, make it a little bit easier for me. For this, you're going to need an aqua painter, and I have regular tap water down inside. This just unscrews and you fill it up from the sink. What I like to do is I like to make sure that I've got a flow of water started here so that the bristles are good and saturated. Once it's wet, I'm going to use the index finger from my other hand, and I'm going to tap that aqua painter right against my finger, which is going to splatter that loose water right along that colored area. The more splatters that you make, the more spots that are going to get left behind for a more realistic look. Now you're going to need to allow this just under a minute or so to evaporate and dry, or if you're impatient like I am, you can go ahead and use one of your craft rags and just very carefully blot that. You want to make sure your rag doesn't have any other residual color on that. Once it's dry, you can go ahead and you can remove those Post-it notes. I recommend starting from the top and pulling down. Let's go ahead and work on the rest of the focal point for this card. I have a piece of thick Whisper White cardstock here, and I'm going to be using the Memento Black ink. I want to use my alcohol-based markers, and I'm assured that this ink will not cause any bleeding. And I've chosen this amazing seahorse image from the stamp set called Seaside Notions. Lots of great images and greetings in here, which makes it perfect for everyone, young, old, male, or female. You'll be able to find that stamp set in the current Stampin' Up! Annual catalog. Head over to lisasstampstudio.com and click on Contact Me. I'm going to go ahead and ink that image up, and I'm going to stamp that here. I chose to use the Crumb Cake Stampin' Blends combination markers. There's a light and a dark shade. These can be purchased individually or as a color combination. I prefer to use the lightest shade first, and I'm also going to add a little bit of interest to this card with an extra tone of the light Calypso Coral. Now, I'm not going to color the whole thing with you. I have one that's already finished. I prefer to use the thicker tip when I have a broader area. And I'm going to concentrate right here in the belly area just to give you an idea of how these work. And I'm just going to add color here. You're going to add this just as you would any other marker. The area will remain wet from the alcohol in the marker for a few seconds. I prefer to let that sit for a little bit before I lay down the next color to avoid any oversaturation and bleeding outside of the outline. I'll come in now with the light Calypso coral color, and I'm going to turn this to make it easier for my hand. And I'm going to add a little bit of color here along the belly, just to give this a little bit of visual interest. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to take the dark crumb cake color, and once again, I'm going to turn that for my hand. And I'm going to add a little color right behind that for some additional tone. Once that's had a few seconds to sit and evaporate, I'm going to come back with the light crumb cake Stampin' Blends marker. And I am going to pull these colors together. What I'm looking to do is remove those harsh lines of the definitions between the differences of the shade. You can see what's happening is that we've got some color here, but we've removed those harsh lines. There is no die for this stamp set, but I did go ahead and I took my scissors and I cut it out. Isn't it beautiful? It's going to really play a great emphasis on this card. Let's go ahead and put the card together. I've got my silicone craft sheet here, which I absolutely love to use when I'm using adhesive. Liquid glue, hot glue, and adhesive will not stick to it. It's going to rub right off, which means I'm going to keep my work surface sticky free. Remember that panel that we created? Well, I'm going to go ahead and flip that over, and I'm going to add adhesive to the back side. And then I've cut myself a layer of Night of Navy cardstock that I'm going to border this on. So I'm going to leave about 1/4 inch border all the way around, and then we'll tack that in place. I'm going to turn this over now, and I'm going to add adhesive to this layer as well. Since adhesive will not stick to that silicone craft sheet, I'm going to place that here. And I've got a base for my card that's crumb cake, which coordinates with the Stampin' Blends and the ink that we've used. I absolutely love the color coordination of the Stampin' Up! Products. I did score this in half before you joined me, and I'll come over it with my bone folder for a nice crisp edge. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add this by centering it in the middle of my card base. Now, before we go ahead and add that seahorse, we can add a greeting if you'd like. On my original card, I used one that says, "Hope you're feeling better," and it's from the Itty Bitty Greetings stamp set. Lots of great sentiments here for both the inside and the outside of your card, and you can see how abundant it is. This product is also in the annual catalog. I decided to change this up just a little bit, and I have the words "Happy Birthday." I'm going to go back to my Memento black ink pad, and we're going to ink that up. I want the words to face out, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my card because I find it easier for my hand to stamp horizontally than vertically. And then we're going to place that here. And then finally, we have our seahorse. We're going to go ahead and flip this over. I'll use full-size dimensionals to anchor those to the back areas of my seahorse. I've gone ahead and I've cut one of the mini dimensionals in half to make it a little bit smaller for this tail area. And then we're going to remove those paper backings. You can choose to mount the seahorse either on the left or the right. I'm going to go ahead and put mine on the left-hand side today. I love the look of the ocean floor here with the water. It really creates a striking card. This is the card we created together today. This is the one I created before you joined me. You can see the distinct differences and how you tear the paper and how the actual card result is different. If you have enjoyed today's video, I would love it if you would give it a thumbs up here on YouTube, which is a like. It certainly helps. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.